let's move on and talk about Keith Curle, then the second manager to be profiled on the podcast today. Keith Curle, a man who's had many clubs at the lower levels in the EFL. He is essentially, he might not want to be, but he is essentially seen as a bit of a firefighter at League Two level, isn't he?
Yeah, well, like you say, he's been around for a long, long time now. And I think he's quite old school in his values, which is not to say that he isn't able to innovate and be a forward thinker. But I think we're talking about a manager with crazy gang values as a player brought up through the ranks at Wimbledon, that, has learned from his own experiences as a manager, because he had some episodes early in his career where, accusations of bullying and things like that, he's kind of got further on in his career and realised he made mistakes in the way that he tried to communicate his message, the way he tried to deal with players in those early days. So firefighter, he's just uncompromising, I think, is the key word where Curle is concerned. He's able to strategise very well, very quickly. And this has been interesting at Oldham towards the end of last season. And when he went in at Northampton at the beginning, when he had half a season, he wants to strategise and get to understand the level, but get to understand his own players by pushing them to the limits in different ways, asking them to do different things before he settles on what his long-term strategy is going to be. So it was an interesting time towards the end of last season at Oldham, but it could be a completely different version, a different team that we see at the start of this season from the free scoring team we saw at the end of last.
Yeah, because they started with a 0-0 when he came in, and then they sort of went back to the Harry Kewell ways, the 3-2s, the 4-3s, the 5-3s. I know some of those you were delighted about, Mike, from a betting point of view. But yeah, that's not Keith Curle's style. He gets labelled as pragmatic. He gets labelled as, occasionally as a bit of a long ball merchant. And it's a tag that he doesn't completely reject. But what he does say is, at the end of the day, his mantra is to just win football matches. And when you come into a club and you're appointed to win football matches and get a team out of the mire, then you have to do what it takes. You can't please the football purists. You have to do what you can do with the players that you've got. And if that is lump the ball forward to a big man, then so be it.
I think Curle loves it. I think he loves being the pantomime villain. I think he loves being recognised for his effectiveness. He's proud of his effectiveness. He's proud of when he gets results, and particularly in a manner that not everybody likes the way that he got that result. It only makes him feel, more empowered that he's in control and they're not in control, in the way that the game is played. So yeah, I think pragmatic is a brilliant word for him, and I don't think he's got one single identity when it comes to tactics. I think he just uses the tool at his disposal, but usually the quickest answers come from being direct. The quickest answers come from being, how you behave out of possession to get a clean sheet mentality. So I think Curle will generally always gravitate towards these behaviours of the way his team line up. But ultimately, yeah, he's a pragmatist. His effectiveness is the key word. It's about what works on it. And it's not about the experience of the players. He does like to foster a camaraderie, a very masculine camaraderie amongst players that teams fear us and that nobody likes to play against us. I think he loves that dynamic. But in terms of players wanting to go out and express themselves and enjoy themselves, you've got to be getting results before Keith Curle will ever entertain that.
And there has in the past been examples of players being isolated, I guess. If you don't buy into what Keith Curle wants, you can find yourself training with the reserves pretty quickly.
Yeah, emotions and feelings are a blind spot. It's not even like he's purposely going out to unsettle or upset players. They're just a blind spot for him. It's about what gets things done. It's about what gets results. And feelings, emotions just get in the way of that a lot of the time from his perspective. So he does like to understand his players. I think this is something we should recognise, is there's a lot of empathy there, and he is very mind-body focused, and he is very trying to put himself in the perspective of his players, to empathise. So he doesn't necessarily feel the emotions that they're feeling, but he does understand the kind of connections that a player that carries themselves, he's very much a chest out, shoulders back sort of man. The way you carry yourself on, in the tunnel, on the pitch, the way you behave, it sends out signals to other people. It makes them fear you and things like that. So he's able to empathise with players and try to work on players, the way that they conduct themselves, the way that they carry themselves in this way, what become winning habits. But he's not, if a player's down in the dumps and just goes into their own mind and shuts off, he doesn't know how to deal with that. He's got no time for it because he's not going to get him results at the end of the day. So the easiest thing for me to do is marginalise the problem and just isolate that player, I would imagine.
He talks about short-termism and how, his approach and coming into a club and just getting results and getting wins is seen as a short-term approach. But then he clarifies that by saying, well, the life of a manager and essentially the life of a professional footballer as well, in the grand scheme of things, is quite short-term. So you have to do what you've got to do, really, because you never know how long you've got.
Yeah, I think his mindset is very strategical, but he's adjusted with the modern game with it, and he becomes almost strategical on a game-to-game basis. Because there's some brilliant examples. One example I remember was when he first went in at Northampton. Talk about strategy, trying to understand the division, trying to understand the referees, and trying to understand his own players. He went in and he played Lincoln away, and Lincoln were going for the title at the top of the table. Under Danny Cowley, were known for surrounding referees and appealing for decisions and that competitive side of the game. And Curle went in and basically one of his main instructions to his players was, if they get 3 players around the referee, I want 4 for the same decision every time. We need to outnumber their players around the referee. And it was just this little mind game he was playing to understand how the referees operate, to play Lincoln at their own game, to see if the players would respond to what he was asking and how well they would execute it. And as memory serves, it just became a farce of a game. It was just non-stop players around the referee over every little decision. And he found out something about his team to then go forward. So the team that he moulded and built at Northampton that got into the playoffs was all these little strategies every step of the way in his learning period when he first came in mid-season. And he didn't approach every game the same way in that period. But then, we're talking about at League Two level, there's no better strategist than Keith Curle. The number of times that Northampton in the full season went into a 2-0 lead, not just the fact that we're promoted, but they probably squandered about 7 or 8 2-0 leads because the information and the plan that they were working to at the very beginning of the game was so good. And it's always tailored to the opposition. He's always focused on what do the opposition do. My first priority is to stop the opposition enjoying their day, enjoying the way they want to play the game. We're not going to let them play the way they want to play. So he's got his own principles in terms of how he's, the directness and how he wants his team to play. But his first thought ahead of every game is, how do we stop the opposition? How do we unsettle them and make them uncomfortable? And how do we get after them? How do we expose their weaknesses?
And he's not afraid of hard work either. He talks about his early days. He was at Chester, he was at Mansfield, various other clubs, Carlisle, of course, where a lot went on under his tenure. But, from driving around looking for training grounds, from, paying for players' wages out of his own pocket, from buying new cones for the training sessions, cleaning the toilets, etc. This is a man who will just take on any challenge. He'll go headfirst into anything. He'll do it if it means that the club move forward.
Yeah, a little bit similar to Nigel Adkins here in the sense the same flow state. It's about getting things done. It's about logistics. It's about seeing solutions and not problems and getting things fixed as quickly as possible and moving forward. And it's very much the same thing going on. This is a player that was the most expensive footballer in the most expensive defender in British football going back 30 years or so. He was pretty much seen as one of the best centre-backs in the Premier League. But he loves it at League Two, because there's lots of logistical problems to solve. Whereas I imagine further up the leagues, the dynamics, I don't doubt for a second he's got the ambition to manage higher up if the opportunity came along. But, I just think that there'd be lots of dynamics that would create conflict, I think is the only way of putting it. Keith Curle is not shy of conflict. And I think he'd spend a lot more time having those difficult conversations that he loves than actually doing, solving problems himself and getting things done, because there's just so much more politics goes on further up the game.
And we have to mention Neil Warnock as well. He worked for several years under Neil Warnock. He learnt a lot from him, but they are quite different, aren't they, in approach? We've done the Neil Warnock podcast. That is available, of course, on YouTube and on our podcast feed. But Neil Warnock is very much playing into the stories and the play. You know, it's all about the players' backgrounds and seems far better with the emotional side. Whereas, as Keith Curle, as you say, has sort of detached himself from that.
Yeah, it's interesting because they use the same functions but in completely different orders. So you can understand why they would get on as manager and assistant and why they would connect on the same, not on the same level, but talk each other's language in any given situation. But they're coming at it from completely different perspectives. And as you say, Neil Warnock's very, very much more adept at the emotional side of things and very much more in the moment. Whereas I think Keith Curle does think a lot steps ahead and does like to get ahead of problems before they surface, whereas Warnock would wait for a problem to surface and be totally comfortable dealing with that problem. I think Curle likes to get ahead of things and be a lot more strategical. But the understanding of the game, there's lots of similarities in terms of, adrenaline, getting the ball into the penalty box as quickly as possible, because that's where the excitement is. Let's not hang around waiting for something to happen. Let's make something happen. It's all about action a lot of the time and results.
Let's talk about his time at Northampton then, because it's, first of all, he came in and said that he arrived there because he wanted a promotion on his CV. Amazingly, he didn't really have a promotion of note on his CV until he joined the Cobblers. And he, of course, did that through the playoffs. They went up to League One, and then he almost completely, this might not have just been his decision, of course. This might have come from higher up. It might have been a directive from there, but he almost completely ripped up the squad that got him promotion and started again. And obviously that didn't work out. He was then relieved of his duties halfway through the season, but it was a curious one, that wasn't it?
Yeah, I think they started with a squad that was weaker than the one that was promoted. But I also think there was an element of, he was very military almost in his style, and everything was so logical and, executed so well. But I believe the team just kind of lost the ability to think for themselves, and that they were kind of lost in that dynamic come the end, and that there was no real feeling there. There was no emotion there. And it was emotion that they needed injected at that point. So yeah, it did feel like a backward step when they were promoted. And, we have to say as well, I think the manner in which they were promoted, coming out of lockdown from a standing start, I think we saw it with Wycombe and we saw it with Northampton, that such a rudimentary brand of football, such a straightforward, direct brand of football was well suited to players who were possibly off the pace once they'd had, Northampton went 2-0 down in the first leg, but came back to win the second leg 3-0. And there was that feeling amongst a lot of clubs that after the first 90 minutes, they were running on empty. They'd not played for 3 months. They'd not even trained barely for, just a couple of weeks or whatever before the playoffs began. And from that standing start, I think the ability of a team to just get the ball out wide, get set pieces, get long throw-ins into the box and just completely bully teams in the penalty box, I think that helped Northampton to get up. I don't think they would have got that promotion had the lockdown not happened and presented them with that scenario. So, I think it was a case of, I think it was nice that Curle got that promotion on his CV. I think he's warranted it a promotion given the work that he did at Carlisle and came close in the playoffs and, some of the jobs he's done more recently. But I wouldn't necessarily be expecting another promotion on his CV anytime soon. But I do expect any Keith Curle team at League Two level to be seriously competitive on a week-to-week basis and to be, consistently more top half than bottom half.
So that leads us to the question then about Oldham. So highest scoring team in the division and highest conceding team in the division last season, but obviously the majority of that was not under Curle. That's not going to be the same approach this season. Oldham could potentially be the lowest conceding team and perhaps one of the lowest scoring teams in the division because Curle is going to take a very different approach this season. Do you think it'll take time to kick in?
Possibly. I think that, well, maybe not. It depends on how, it's almost about the willingness of the player, not the willingness, but the ability of the players to execute what he's asking, because I think his strategies will be very good. I think he'll have a lot of the opponents sussed out. So I think Oldham could be a first goal team. I think that they could, surprise in how often they get the noses in front in games. But ultimately, I would expect a lot less drama in the sense that I do expect them to have more of a clean sheet mentality and build from a solid foundation, as opposed to, I think they might go after opposition early on in games and then retreat and look to close out. That's very much a Keith Curle methodology. So yeah, that would be my take. Is I don't think we should be expecting a high-scoring team in the league again.
And for Curle himself, you say you don't really expect another promotion on his CV anytime soon. Not expected to come with Oldham, but in the future, do you think, he probably has desires, as you say, to manage at a high level, but if those League Two clubs keep calling when they're in a bit of trouble, he's probably going to keep joining them, isn't he?
Yeah, I think he's a solid appointment for anyone at that level, because he will get on top of a job quickly. He will get to the root cause of what's been going wrong if it's a club in turmoil, and he will sort it out. And he will, and this is the interesting thing about Oldham, is he will manage the relationship above. And he did this at Carlisle. He almost became too formidable for the boardroom, that they couldn't handle him anymore because he was demanding so much of them. He's a very controlling figure. And this is an interesting dynamic with the owner at Oldham and the director that's, I believe is his brother. Because they've almost wanted to pick the team. That won't be happening under Keith Curle, picking the team. So, this could be conflict on the horizon as well at Oldham, that these conversations will be had. And I think Keith Curle will almost tell his directors or his chairman to man up and let's have this conversation face to face, because he loves them awkward conversations to get things off your chest. Let's get on the same page and understood, but then create a situation for himself where ultimately he's in charge, and I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic at Oldham, given the history and the managers that have come away from that job saying, I'm not entirely comfortable with the way that the owner was trying to run the club, and that some of the things that were being asked of me, Curle won't, he'll try to control that situation, not just back away from it or not just try to maneuver his way out of it. He'll meet it head on and have those conversations face to face with those owners.